Donald Trump is
A
very
master at that.
he's a master at
Yeah.
using words that people fill their own ideologies into. That is, he basically puts a bucket out there, and you can fill that bucket up with whatever it is that you want to believe,
Yeah.
and then try to analyze why those particular words, because if you think about it, it's pixels on a screen. It's alphanumeric characters that somebody has typed into their device, and it's come out of your device, and it's raised your blood pressure and made you angry, right?
Yeah.
What is it about the arrangements of those letters on that screen that is making you so angry?
If the person said something and you have trouble replying, okay, I put that up. What is an image, a simple image of what they just said? And then you ask yourself, what is wrong with that image? What's not clicking with that image? There is something missing, something fucked up, something wrong with that image. What is it? And that's your reframe.
Welcome to the Duke Report. Today we are deep diving into the power of language and ways it shapes our reality. My guest is Matteo Morelli, an expert in neurolinguistic programming. Matteo runs one of the best YouTube channels out there on NLP, and he's the author of Covert Hypnosis in Real Life. He has a new book he's working on, and I'm really excited to read it. He also offers many valuable resources on his website, including Mastering Your Inner States with NLP. Matteo's journey began with a desire to understand the human mind better, taking him from feeling disconnected during his teenage years to mastering unconscious communication. He learned to adapt his language and to break free from imposed beliefs. Now he's here to help us master communication, resolve conflicts, and understand how words frame our reality. And the first step may be to learn active listening. Welcome, Matteo. You have been a really big impact on me, Matteo, and I'm really excited to have you on the show today to talk about how language frames our reality, and how the management of the words going in and out of our mouths and ears controls that. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
I'm really excited about a new book that you're working on, because I have been working on my own book for 3 years now, and that I'm calling Reframing Reality. It's got a much bigger scope than your book, because I look at the elites and the way that the world around us is the words are used, and the different processes that intelligence agencies and the like use in order to control us. But language is the most key component, and it's arguable that it's the oldest technology out there. You know, you look at stories in the Bible like the Tower of Babel, and you start to realize that the people who have been in control of our reality have been using words the entire time, and that we don't see them the same way that fish don't see water. And so Robert Dilts wrote the book that you turned me on to, Sleight of Mouth, where he aptly identified the cause-effect complex equivalency, which I'm trying to rebrand in my book. I'm not sure that I'll be successful, but I'm calling it an if-then equals because, just to try to make it simpler for people to understand, because cause-effect complex equivalency is kind of it's a bunch of words, and
It is the NLP jargon, yeah.
yeah, exactly. But Dilts identified 14 different ways that you can reframe that cause-effect complex equivalency. And as I understand it, you came to a similar conclusion that I came to, that 14 is a lot of things to remember. I think that there's psychological studies that show that most people can't remember more than 7 things, can't keep more than 7 things going on in their head at the same time. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, indeed I created my own model based on what Robert Dilts had developed. So I called mine the magical linguistics. I guess first of all because in order to prevent potential legal issues, because I wanted to write a book on that, but I didn't want to call my thing exactly the same thing as what Dilts has done. And besides the name, the big difference is indeed on the simplification, because same thing my problem with the 14 patterns was not that it was 14 itself, it was that several of them to me were the same thing or close to the same thing. And we can go more in details about that later if you want with the chart. But I felt like many of the, several of them were kind of the same. So I wanted to only reduce to what was the most efficient, the most effective, and what has the biggest impact when you're in a conversation with anyone. What are the kind of linguistic patterns that tend to either reframe the argument most easily or literally shut down the brain if really you are with somebody who does not let you speak? And what are the simplest tactics to go there and prevent yourself from being owned? Because some people try to use those to also prevent others from thinking by themselves. So I guess that is one of the easiest ways to summarize what I'm developing right now.
One of the things that I think a lot about is the idea that there is a difference between being a hypnotist or being practicing neurolinguistic programming and being able to recognize or understand the patterns. I think that people can get thrown off by the jargon, like you said earlier. But I also think that you don't necessarily have to want to be a hypnotist to learn this stuff. That is, when I first reached out to you, you asked me if I wanted to be a therapist, and I said no. And then you asked me if I wanted to do self-help. And I said no. And you said, well, why do you want to learn this stuff? And I said, because I want to learn how the media and politicians use it as a weapon against me. And you said, well, that's really easy. And I said, what's that? And you said, you only need to learn one pattern. You only need to learn the cause-effect complex equivalency, which was a lot for me to think about at that moment, because it's what all politicians and talking heads on television use. And I was a little dumbfounded. I thought, really, there's only one thing. And you said, get this book, Sleight of Mouth. And then you said, oh no, there's an easier book, The User's Guide to Sleight of Mouth by Doug O'Brien.
Yeah.
And we could talk about whether or not I think Doug O'Brien's charts make it easier or harder to learn.
Did you want me to comment on that? Or
Sure. Yeah.
So the Doug O'Brien, first of all, I think they worked together, O'Brien and Dilts. I'm not sure about that, but I think they worked together in the development or not long after the development of Sleight of Mouth. The initial O'Brien book was easier because it was just laying out the patterns one by one, whereas the initial Dilts book was mixing Sleight of Mouth, which was his invention at this point in 2000, with philosophy, with formal logic, with other NLP tools, with other therapeutic methods, with many coaching methods. So for somebody who only wants, like you, okay, give me the language, how it works, that was like a lot of added things. And for somebody like me who was already like 5 years into NLP when I first read Sleight of Mouth, the Dilts one was pretty easy. But I understood pretty easily that for somebody who does not have 5 years back in the back of studying all the NLP books out there, that was a lot. So I thought the Doug O'Brien one was easier. But also I never learned with the Doug O'Brien one because for me the Dilts one was enough because I already had an LP behind. But then in the end, the biggest part is not so much how theoretically it is laid out, it is how much you practice with it, because most of my level comes from practicing with a friend. And the funny thing about what you said on when you contacted me is I definitely remember when you contacted me. First of all, because I think you were one of the first ones ever to reach out for anything specific, because I had just started at this point. I did not remember, though, that I had advised you about Sleight of Mouth. I knew I had advised this to somebody else, but I'm not sure if it was you. But at this point, the funny thing is, at this point, I hadn't codified yet anything. about sleight of mouth, about how to learn it, how to practice with it. I could use it, kind of, but I was not aware yet about how can I transfer those skills to anybody else. It came later through YouTube and through doing the breakdowns, where I figured out, okay, if I want to make people understand, I need to explain it that way. And one of the biggest conclusions when I did my breakdowns was the cause and effect thing, indeed, that if you don't get that straight, then nothing else is relevant. Because you first need to figure out, whenever you hear something, somebody complaining, somebody brutalizing any ideology, whatever, this is a cause and effect they are doing. First of all, once you get that part, then we can go into sleight of mouth. How do you reframe? But most people trying to learn it try to go into the reframes right away without first understanding, what am I dealing with in terms of belief? What kind of cause and effect am I dealing with right now? Once this is clear, then we can reframe.
Right. I want to expand on that because I'm calling that active listening. But but before we get to that, I also wanted to point out that your breakdowns, the free stuff that you give away, the stuff that you pay for is fantastic, and I highly recommend all your courses. But the free stuff that people get just by giving up just by putting you on a mailing list, the free things that you make available to people are so powerful, and they're so good because they take these big complicated books that you said that mix a lot of philosophy and a lot of background and all of this other stuff, and you boil it down and just kind of lay it out in the shortest and most succinct way possible. So I highly recommend that people go to mindtitans.com and they sign up for whatever it is that you're offering. I know that you've got a couple of different things that you've offered over the last couple of years, but they're all really, really valuable. The second comment that I wanted to make was that I don't think that you need to know how to be a hypnotist in order to understand how hypnosis is being used all the time around us. The same way that you don't need to you don't have to play football to know how football is played. You don't have to be a football player to know how football works. And I'm using football because in America it means one thing, in Europe it means another, but it's
But I know what you mean. Don't worry.
It's the same. It's the same idea, and so
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people, when they hear NLP or they hear hypnosis, they think, to your point that you just made earlier, you were practicing with your friend. It's a skill that you have to practice, and
Yes.
if you don't practice it, you can get to a point where you can recognize a cause effect. But unless you have a good framework in your head and have practiced it for being able to execute on that, you're not going to be a hypnotist. But it doesn't really matter if what you're trying to do is identify it as a weapon that's being used to manipulate you. So that's my point. And so the first question I have, and I think that it's one of the things. It's probably the first skill that you have to develop in order to be able to understand this, is what I call active listening, which is trying to figure out how to spot those patterns. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
We could talk in many ways about that. That is indeed one of the biggest first ones. The way I usually explain it is more through the nonverbal reading, but that comes hand in hand with the active listening concept. The more you listen and pay attention to the whole nonverbal of the person, the more you can calibrate what they need to hear and to what they really mean through any kind of comment, claim, attack they make in their language. This is first of all about the way I like to call it is understanding who you are talking to, because the same exact words, coming back to the subjectiveness of how the same words can mean something else, the same exact phrase can mean 1,000 different things based on who is the person who says it, and what is the context around, and what is the relationship between the two individuals. There are countless factors. So indeed, it is kind of pointless to try to just reframe a statement if we haven't figured out first, who is that person, what do they need, Because if somebody is aggressive or complaining, they need something. They need reassurance. They need to unveil their fear, their anxieties maybe, or their anger, if they have been betrayed, if they have been manipulated. They need something. So understanding who it is, what they need, and what do they see in me? Because if they see me like a political figure who is opposed to what they want, maybe they're going to be aggressive just for that, without even knowing me. So I need to figure out all of those. And indeed, I call it differently, but I get the concept of active listening. That is indeed the first phase to develop, and the phase that many people never get into, because they just want to presuppose that they know everything, they are right. Anything that has been said, it is already what they think, what they know. So they don't really pause their thinking for a second to listen indeed and figure out what exactly am I dealing with right now. And from there, we can reframe only later.
One of the things that I've noticed is that in social media, where you've got delayed, I'll use Twitter, for example. Twitter presents itself as a conversation, except that it's time. It's not a real time conversation. And one of the things that I've noticed, and it's become a way for me to learn how to use NLP, or at least the ideas of NLP. I'm not necessarily trying to reprogram anyone, but I do like to understand pattern. Like I said, active listening. I think that you could teach yourself that by looking at the way that words are presented in Twitter. And because you can see the cause effects, you can see the presuppositions, you can see the complex equivalencies. And in fact, ChatGPT knows sleight of mouth. If somebody writes a tweet that is a cause effect complex equivalency, you can ask ChatGPT to apply the 14 reframes to it, and it will just spit them all out. And so I think that one of the things that's interesting is that you can teach yourself these skills by simply looking at something like Twitter, because you're not now you're not going to get the physical part. You're not going to necessarily get the tone of voice and the intent and those types of things. But just by being able to see the words, I think that there's a way to figure out a lot of this stuff. There may actually be a book in it. So using NLP to communicate effectively in social media.
Well, I guess just look into any kind of political advice on how to phrase political views, and that will be NLP applied to Twitter, basically, or social media in general. But it made me think about something else about learning, because first of all, indeed, isolating a skill makes it easier to learn it, because so language alone without the nonverbal, when you think about that, is easier to dissociate. And I make the parallel with learning a new language in general, because many people complain to me that it is, what you teach is so great, because usually it feels like learning a whole new language. And I keep saying, well, what specific word does not already belong to your English language? Because all the words, you know them. It's just a different structure. So you already know the language, but I get the point. It is frustrating because it seems overwhelming to learn too many techniques. And one great way I found out over the years to learn a new language is the best way is to attach it to a topic you actually love learning about. If you try to figure out how to speak German or Italian or anything, just vocabulary by vocabulary, like in school, that's a mess. Many people get confused or disappointed because they don't make progress with that. They give up and they say, yeah, whatever, I will never get that. If you, on the opposite, attach the learning of the language with a topic you love learning about, so if you only try to read basic, very small novels or comic books or whatever in the language you want to learn, that will be 100 times easier, because you can look up the words one by one. You will have proper context. If I want to read a Marvel comics from Thor or whatever in German, I can just see what the action is visually. I can just try to translate only the words I don't understand, and I'm going to learn the language easier that way. The way you described with Twitter is a great example because you are developing the skill of figuring out the language through something you are legitimately interested into. Twitter politics eventually, or whatever you're reading on it, this is something you will read anyway, I guess, even if you were not trying to figure out language. So that is the best way, attaching the learning to something you legitimately want and you're already doing. That way you save mental processing for, oh, everything is new from scratch, I don't understand. If it is linked to something you are already doing every day anyway, the learning is going to accelerate massively. So pretty good point on that.
Yeah, I agree. I was a technologist at one point in my career, and learning how to write code is brutal unless you have something to do. If you're
Yeah.
actually trying to get the code to do something, it's so much easier to learn how to use it.
Mm,
So
definitely.
there's an analogy there. Yeah. So tell me about Mind Titans and what you're trying to do. Because, like I said, when I first reached out to you, you were asking me about being a therapist or
Mm.
doing self help. So tell me about where Mind Titans is now and where you're directing that.
So yeah, in the very beginning, it was pretty unclear. It was centered on NLP. That's something I could figure out because I loved it, but I was not really sure of a niche or a specific audience I wanted to target or anything. I just knew that I loved talking about it, and the first thing people reacted to were my breakdowns of Richard Bandler, who is one of the creators of NLP. When I communicated with those people, so except you, but many people just loved the therapeutic approach with those techniques. That's why initially I centered more on that. Then, so the business became okay. I could live from that, but then I had the kind of the loss of meaning about this. About I'm producing this only to make money, and I don't really care about money in the end. Like not as much as I thought I would. So it kind of got into a confusing phase of okay, but why exactly am I still doing this? And I think it took like 1 or 2 years. In the meantime, the first channel was deleted, long story. And I created a new one, this time really questioning myself on where is this going indeed. And I hired a coach at some point who was an expert on this, aligning your work with your interests, your passions, or whatever, finding meaning in what you do for a living. And what came out was very interesting because he said, what is the thing that pisses you off the most in the world? Or what is the thing you really can't stand anymore? And I almost muted myself because I had something popping up in my head, but I thought, yeah, this can't be that, so let's ignore it. He said, no, tell me this one. And I said, well, the first thing that came to my mind is people arguing for no reason. People just yelling at each other, but for literally nothing, just because they project their insecurities, like stupid bullshit. And when this came out and we elaborated on this, I started connecting the dots that all the videos I had in the previous channel that worked the best were always kind of linked with communicating in healthier ways, communicating in non-violent ways, and bypassing resistance, meaning when somebody is pissed off at you, how do you calm them down and still make a point even if they're aggressive? And I thought this is funny that all the videos I have that brought me the most clients or the most audience were the ones where I had an alignment in the end with the content that I was producing. So it made me repurpose, okay, maybe my whole thing is not general NLP because it is very vague. Maybe it is really much more on this, the communication tactics that allow anyone to resolve conflicts, whether personal, whether professional, whether political, whatever, in a way that won't aggravate relationships or in a way that people will just get cooled down, basically. So it made a lot of sense with Sleight of Mouth because it is all about it. How do you, well, you can use it to be aggressive too, but how the way I like to teach Sleight of Mouth is much more to decrease resistance and conflicts rather than getting them worse. So that's pretty much where I'm going to, I guess, bringing more awareness in the world about how can you use language to decrease conflicts for yourself and the people around you. I guess that could be a good way to explain the deeper meaning I find, at least in what I'm doing.
Well, that's it's so interesting to me because it makes my it just makes my head spin a little bit because one of the theses that I have in the book that I'm writing is that the original that we live in a world that's basically controlled by people who are using divide and conquer tactics all the time. And whether or not you want to call it, Marxist dialectics or postmodernism or whatever the flavor is, because it changes from location to location and context to context. But the original story of the Eve being convinced by Satan as the viper to go back on her contract with Adam living in a perfect world is this kind of divide and conquer story, and we've been living with it ever since. And it seems like the epistemological or teleological lesson of the Sermon on the Mount by Jesus is to go in the opposite direction instead of to fight with other people, to figure out a way to get along with them. And this is the age-old battle, right? Our dichotomies are reinforced by things like sports, where we have to pick a team and we have to root for a team, and all of this stuff is kind of inculcated into our being, thinking that Leo Strauss, who's the American college professor, said Americans love good guys and bad guys, and breaking out of that idea that people are on one team or another is tough for a lot of people. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to your work, because it's incredibly valuable to be able to figure out how to build these bridge building skills.
One thing in the beginning I thought about when you mentioned the origins of your desires to develop those things, and that first of all, we are controlled by bigger entities, of course. Religion, I can go on that topic for a while, but to stay on the fact that many people, the fish in the water concept, the big problem that was outlined in the Structure of Magic, so the first book where they talked about the meta model, the origin before Sleight of Mouth, it was that we just simplify cognitively everything to understand the world faster. Because if we were constantly paying attention to literally everything, if I had to stay conscious of all the colors in the room right now, of all the micro gestures you make, everyone will get crazy if we had to consciously figure out everything that's happening all the time. And language is the same, so we just delete a lot of information and put everything in categories, in boxes. This person says this about this politician, oh, he's a bad guy. Easy, cause and effect, okay. That way I save mental energy. We all do this. A big part of linguistics is to enlarge the spectrum of analysis, to broaden the scope of attention to, okay, there is the basic cause and effect my mind can do automatically. There are also other cause and effects I can look at least look at. Maybe the first assumption I have is right, but at least I can look up other options into how can I make an interpretation of what this person wants, or when they claim this or that, what do they really mean? At least developing more awareness of all the alternative options, and there are, whatever someone says to you, there are always like 1,000 possible interpretations and meanings to their sentence. So a big part of this whole understanding of sleight of mouth and how language works, or active listening, is to broaden the scope of awareness of how many other alternative options can I find to solve a conflict with that person, or to help that person if they are asking for help and they are limited in their mind and they don't know how to get out of it. That's the therapeutic way of doing it. Always figuring out the other options. That's one way of looking at it.
And one way of doing that is to put yourself into the other person's frame or to put it into a third person's frame. And I find that uh, when I first read about that, I mean, we all heard the term empathy, and my friend Courtney has got a whole thing that she's been running down the etymology of the word empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But we all have. Uh, it's difficult, I think, for many people to do that. I think it's difficult for people to, but once you do it once, you can you can sit and criticize somebody who's saying something that you don't like. And it's easy enough, like you said, as a lower level of effort to be able to just categorize them and put them in a box. But if you could move yourself into a position where you could think, well, where did they wake up this morning thinking that? What were the circumstances of their life that led them to the place where they actually think that whatever it is that they're saying is correct or true? That's a tough thing. That's a tough nut for a lot of people to do. But if you can do it, your whole life changes a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry, I only have the book in French here, but the book I learned that into of the perceptual positions and how to develop it was mostly two books, actually. The second one is this one. The first book is Modeling with NLP by Dilts, that I have only in French here. So you have to get it that like this, but it is Modeling with NLP. And the second one is the Deep Trance Identification.
Yep.
You can see it. And those two are the two in which I learn about those concepts of perceptual positions, indeed putting yourself in the shoes of the person. And I had a big debate about this empathy thing with the brother of a friend of mine, because he said empathy is all about being a good person, because to figure out what people need, you have to be a gentle, good person to put yourself in their shoes. I said I heavily disagree. Because when you think about certain guys, for example, in Wall Street, or certain guys who are crooks, or scammers, con artists, they can very easily spot the vulnerabilities of their victims and still scam them. So, and I don't think many of them try to justify their actions. Many of them pretty much know what they are doing is bad. They are still doing it. So my big conclusion about that, about empathy, which probably is a contradiction to what most psychological approaches pretend about it, is that empathy is just one way of putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else. It is one potential method that is ingrained in our neurology from the day we were born, for most people. There is another way that I figured out by reading those books, which is purely through visualization. If you can visualize yourself getting out of your own body, and we can proceed with how to develop visualization muscle. If you can see yourself getting out of your own body, migrating into the body of the other person you're talking to, maybe not in real time, because that will be a lot of mental work, but like when you are by yourself after a difficult conflict, or just to prepare maybe a negotiation, if you have to do anything like this, to prepare it, visualizing yourself ahead of time, getting out of your own shoes, like you see yourself in the room you're sitting in, and you see yourself getting inside the body and mind of the person that you will be interacting with. You can imagine yourself as a smoke, as a ghost, as anything you want to help your mind visualize that. You get inside and you ask yourself questions, simple auditory processing. What am I feeling right now? Being in the position of the person you will be interacting with. What am I feeling? Basic question. First thing that comes to mind. Doesn't need to be anything complex. First thing that comes to mind. Okay, I feel pride. I'm proud. Oh, cool. So how does a proud person needs to be interacted with? Or like, how should I interact with a person full of pride, for example? And into the negotiation later, that may help figure out what will I need to say. And even if you don't remember it consciously, the fact of having done that exercise in the beforehand, will prepare your unconscious mind to say the right things once the situation will have to be handled. So since I did that maybe like probably 500 times with many different people, I guess by now it is unconscious competence in me. So I do it automatically with many people. even sure that I do that automatically with everyone I talk to. So I kind of always know, okay, this person needs to hear this one I need to say that. And the process can be done more easily through visualizing because it gives a concrete explanation rather than empathy, which is very abstract and has different definitions depending on what is the psychological book you read. So empathy is very broad. I like to talk about visualizing and how do we develop the visualization to develop those mental skills.
Yeah, I actually found the tweet from my friend Courtney. Let me show you this. And I'll bring this up. So let me see if I can blow this up a little. She said, "Yikes, I may be wrong. The word empathy appeared in 1908 as a translation of the German Einfühlung, Einfühlung. I think I'm pronouncing that right, literally in feeling. This early empathy was not about understanding another person, but about projecting one's own imagined feelings and movements into objects," which is kind of antithetical, right? Empathy explained how a viewer perceived a mountain or an architectural column as if it were rising because the viewer transferred his or her own feelings of stretching upwards into the mountain or column. So that just goes to show you how words change their meaning over time, and how we we think of them differently. I have a question for you, because one of the things that I write about, and I'm doing a video about it now, is Tulsi Gabbard is an American politician. And she went to a convention a couple of weeks ago called the Something Liberty Convention in the United States. And she, in her keynote speech, she was talking about how when she was driving to this Liberty Convention, how she didn't really think that she understood the meaning of the word liberty, and that she had to look it up in the dictionary before she came to the event. And she spoke very openly about this. And I was a little bit surprised because she had served two tours in Iraq, and then she had been a congresswoman for one term, for 2 years, I think. And I thought, well, it's very interesting that she put her life on the line and then dedicated her entire career to a government that supposedly stands for liberty without actually knowing what the word means. And I've also had the opportunity, I ask people this question a lot. And again, because you're multilingual and you're a NLP practitioner, there's probably a lot of different levels to this question, but I asked normies on the street if they know the difference between the word liberty and the word freedom, because in English, liberty means freedom within limits. That is that is when a captain of a ship pulls his ship into a port and he lets the crew go off the ship. They have liberty, right? So they are at liberty to leave the ship, but they have to come back at a certain time. And if they don't come back at a certain time, then they are in trouble. As opposed to the word freedom, which means do what you want, go in the direction that you feel like going in without constraint. So liberty is freedom within constraint. Freedom is liberty, freedom is without constraint. And so, and I know that France in the Revolution famously was liberty, equality, égalité, right? I've talked to people who speak Spanish, and people who speak Spanish use liberty, libertad, for both meanings. And so I'm wondering what, and I think that part of the big problem that we have in not only in the United States, but I think in any of these democracies, is that freedom is used as a way to disintermediate the culture, and push the limits, push culture beyond the limits of liberty. That is, if you have a culture, if you've got a religious culture, John Adams famously said about the United States Constitution that unless you have a religious or moral people, it will not work, because you need the self-discipline of a culture, the values and processes of a society, to be able to keep the culture from exceeding the freedom within the culture to exceed the boundaries of the liberty. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And so I was just wondering, in French, is there a differentiation between liberty and freedom? And what do you think about that insight that I've got?
Just check because I was not aware of the difference in English, and indeed in French it is the same exact word like in Spanish. Pretty much, I guess anything in Spanish or Italian or Portuguese will be the same as in French because it is the Latin languages. And indeed, we have the same word, but it is the same word. But when I checked on Google Translate, it referred to what you were saying, that liberty meant something else than freedom. But in French, it is the same word. Now, for the insight, well, from the NLP angle, it is what we call a nominalization. So now I'm getting the NLP jargon, but basically any noun that has been any verb that has been turned into a noun. Yeah. So or any kind of adverb or adjective. So here we can say being free, or the act of becoming free, turned into the noun freedom. Basically, those nominalizations are the worst words to figure out because they are so vague and so abstract that anyone likes to put their own feelings behind those, especially based on the culture they grew up into. So if you take the context of America, obviously a person who grew up black in the minor districts will have a different definition of what freedom should look like, should be like, compared to the guy who grew up in Washington and had his parents a dentist and a doctor. So anyone will have a different interpretation for the words based on where they grew up in. And those big words, so freedom, love, humanity, equality, big one, but I won't even touch equality. I have other ones in French. Any of those words people will tend to project a lot of feelings and sometimes loaded feelings behind those. Those are the big red signals to not try to reframe somebody who uses that word before figuring out what definition they have for the word. Now with the politician you mentioned, who has the concern with the Iraq war, right? That's what you said?
Tulsi Gabbard was her name.
Tulsi Gabbard. So I'm not sure if I have any insight about that. Do you have any specific question about this matter?
No, but I think that your identification of it as a nominalization, and then you're trying to figure out how people are defining the term that they have nominalized, is really important, because I see that all the time. Politicians, Donald Trump is very
master.
He's a master at using words that people fill their own ideologies into. That is, he basically puts a bucket out there, and you can fill that bucket up with whatever it is that you want to believe about him. And then when he doesn't deliver on it later, I've noticed there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. Full disclosure, I was a Trump guy. I worked on a lot of the social media that got him elected. I was inside with a lot of the political movers and shakers, and I wanted to believe what he was saying. My biggest criticism of Donald Trump is that he had 4 years and he didn't actually do the things that he said he was going to do. He did some of them, but many of the things that he set my expectations to, or allowed me to set my expectations myself without actually ever having, this is the nominalization thing, right? I was looking at his nominalizations, I was projecting what I wanted into whatever it is that he was saying.
Yeah.
And then he disappointed me because because I had assigned a task list to him that he never really actually considered, but just put language out there that led me to believe that.
Yeah. So if we take the tangent of the political talks, even before the nominalizations, which are the higher levels, we have the unspecified verbs that are extremely used also in those monologues or discussion.
Speeches.
Speeches, yeah, thank you. Speeches where they want to ally everyone under their wings. If I want to improvise any kind of political talk for any party, I can say I believe that the really important thing, Peter, is to make choices that will elevate the people, choices that will gather people together. You know what I mean? Right, choices that will make people get further in life. Life, same thing. Life is a nominalization too. People who will choices that will make people find more power into their life. That means nothing. I just said nothing. But that's how politicians are trained to communicate, especially when they are being asked uncomfortable questions by journalists. They are trained to speak only in vague language like this, so that they don't have to give anything too specific. And only someone like you who's really digging into the facts and information can figure out, well, they said this, but they did that. Or they promised and they did not. But many people won't even get there. They will just listen to their feelings of the day and project, like you described, project their feelings of the day on the words that are being said. On top of that, if the politician like Trump is heavily not charismatic, but like kind of aggressive into, yeah, I'm going to make things, I'm going to do things, I'm going to do that. Anyone who's angry will easily project the relief they need for their anger on this persona, and feel like, oh, this is the leader we need. Now, is it or is it not? I'm not qualified to answer that. I don't know. But in terms of language, definitely he is very, very, very good at only using very short sentences that won't piss off anyone outside of people who disagree with him, or like the other political camp. One example in an interview I saw from him, I think a few months ago, where I could sense that people were asking him to comment about some guy in the military that I think he didn't know of, and what he kept repeating was, "Yeah, he's a great guy. Oh, yeah, he's done great things. Didn't he? Yeah, great guy, great guy." He kept repeating that. From my perspective, I guess he didn't even know who it was or barely knew. But the fact of repeating very short sentences, yeah, definitely, yeah, well, great achievements. And what he did there, great guy, great. In the end, like, there was nothing specific he said. But the fact of reducing your sentences to short words like this can make it appear like you know what you're talking about when you don't really in the end.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that I read a few weeks ago. I guess Noam Chomsky, one of the things that Noam Chomsky pointed out, I think in his doctoral dissertation, is that sentences can be syntactically correct and meaningless.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that to, I think it was on Twitter or some other place that I mentioned that. And I was attacked by someone because I was quoting Chomsky. And they had this good guy, bad guy frame that because Chomsky is politically not aligned with whatever it is that they're saying, that he must be wrong.
Okay.
And I was simply commenting on something that Chomsky said about syntax, which is that you can create sentences that are syntactically correct that are meaningless sentences, but they seem like real sentences. And I think that what you're describing is what politicians do a lot. And if you throw a few nominalizations in there, a nominalization is like people say it's where you take I think that the example that they give in all the textbooks is divorce. A divorce is a process that you go through. It's a legal process, but somebody may tell you that they can't do something because of their divorce, like it's a refrigerator and it's sitting in the door of their house and they can't get through it. And so a nominalization is simply a linguistic term for using taking a verb or an adjective, like you said, and turning it into a noun. And people are doing that all the time. And then they're filling that refrigerator with their own ideas, right? So
Yeah, a very big thing, by the way, on nominalizations, because indeed, since it is so loaded, any counter argument, including a statement about somebody else's nominalization, may cause a lot of feelings in the conversation. The right way, the oldest and simplest way to denominalize something when somebody is attacking you with a word like that is to turn it into a verb and then ask the question, how does this verb work? So if we take back the example of freedom, if you get anyone complaining that freedom in America right now is not present, or the current politicians are preventing freedom, or that the next ones will prevent freedom, whatever, instead of arguing on facts about politics, which are very big topics and that can go into hours and hours of debates, you simply ask, how does one gets free? Get back the word freedom into the word free. How does a person like you or me gets free? And from there, you're going to get down to the specifics of their feelings. Well, if they, depending on which socioeconomic background they come from, they will point to facts that help the culture they grew up in. If they are minor ethnicity, they may point out facts that would help the black people or whatever. If they come from another background, they will just point to the things their parents told them should be acquired. But basically, you will get the argument to something more specific where they can unveil the feelings they want to unveil by attacking you in the beginning. So usually turning a word like that into a verb and asking, how does this work, or how can we find more of this, that just gets the conversation into a resolution rather than counter-attacking on counter facts, which can take a long time, and the person might not even see what you meant in the end on this side.
Well, that leads me to two other questions. And I wrote down one, and now I'm going to forget the second one. But the first question is that you mentioned loaded language, and I think that the first person who mentioned loaded language that I read, I mean, he might have got it from someone else, was Lifton, Robert Lifton, I think is his name, and he wrote about loaded language in his book Totalism. I can't remember what the rest of the title of the book was, but in that there's a specific kind of loaded language that he talks about that he calls a thought terminating cliche.
Okay.
Okay. Which and a thought terminating cliche is a phrase or an expression that ends thinking. So somebody may be I guess the best example I probably could give off the top of my head is that if you support Donald Trump, that must mean that you're a racist.
Okay.
And so that ends the conversation, because you're not qualified, or you're whatever your ideas or your thoughts or your feelings are about a situation, they're invalid because this thought terminating cliche has been applied to you. And that usually winds up becoming a showstopper. I know that I was having a conversation, a rather heated conversation with somebody who was trying to mitigate an argument that I was having with another person, and the person I was talking to said, "Well, it takes two to tango," and it stopped me. Like my brain froze. At that point, because it was like, what you've done is you've eliminated my ability to have a rational discussion about the argument that we're having on its merits, and you've you kind of put it into this category where the arguments on both sides are equal because you said so, and at that point, I think that's why I froze up, because I didn't know how to argue on or I didn't know how to reframe it at that point, because I froze, which reminds me of the second thing that I was going to mention, which was that, like I said, one of the things that I've been doing lately in order to try to get people to understand the cause-effect complex equivalency is that I find tweets online, and if they meet the criteria of a cause-effect complex equivalency, I run the script on ChatGPT, and I run the 14 reframes, and then I hit it as a reply on the tweet. The Council on Foreign Relations, which I think is responsible for most of the nonsense that's been going on in the world, including the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, does this on every other tweet. Like if you go to they have a magazine called Foreign Policy, and almost they've gotten better since I started trolling them, because they actually deleted a tweet last week.
Really?
When I put the 14 responses and they deleted the tweet. But what I was going to point out is that somebody who followed me, who I liked the fact that they followed me, but I also don't get too ego invested if they start trying to take me into a direction that I don't want to go in. They started engaging with my example. That is, somebody used a cause-effect complex equivalency. Then I posted the 14 reframes, and then they started having a conversation with me about one of the reframes. So instead of understanding what I was trying to illustrate, which is, here's a cause-effect complex equivalency, here's the 14 ways that you can respond to it, they started having a conversation with me about one of the reframes as if that was my idea. Like, it was my idea. And when I told them that it wasn't really my idea and I didn't want to engage, I said it was a rabbit hole I didn't want to go down. They called me a coward, which I thought was... I kind of laughed out loud when I read it, because I thought, you've completely missed the point of what I'm trying to do. I've given you an example of a cause-effect complex equivalency. I've given you the 14 responses, and now you want to argue with me about one of the responses. It was kind of funny, but I do think that those two examples, one of my having brain freeze when somebody used a thought-terminating cliche on me, and then the second of the person who was engaging with one of the examples on one of my reframes, just goes to show that we are not as prepared for the words that we encounter on a day-to-day basis as we may think we are.
Definitely not.
And so what do you recommend? If somebody wants to really understand what it is that we're talking about, and I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll frame it as like different levels, right? If you're just interested in neurolinguistic programming, but you don't want to be a programmer, then how would you start? And then if you wanted to learn neurolinguistic programming, what would be the next steps?
So reverse engineering to how does someone start in there, even if they don't want to become a master, but just they want to be able to use it, right? That's the question.
Or understand how it's being used on them.
Oh, yeah, okay. What I would like to bring the attention to in that case is really the topics or the people that keep coming back. Because as we said, it has to be linked with something tangible in real life. If it is just abstract and theoretical, people just give up and never really learn it. If it is linked with something personal you have lived or that you are living right now, it will be 100 times easier to grasp and figure out and connect the dots on, oh, this means that. So the big thing is, if it is being used, well, of course it is being used on you and me and everyone, but if it is a problem, the big thing is to identify, so going more specific, to identify what are the negative situations or the negative people or the negative feelings that keep coming back and that I would like an answer to, that I would like to be able to reply or to give an answer. There is obligatorily one type of person or one type of situation for you, Twitter, for example, that keeps coming back. The first thing is to identify, why do I think this keeps coming back? What would somebody else say about me in that situation? Why am I attracting, and that doesn't mean it is a bad thing, why am I attracting that situation or provoking the situation eventually, depending on people, and identifying what in me has caused that. So taking ownership is one way of looking at things. Obviously, it is not absolute truth. It is one version of reality, like we said. But I like to, in my philosophy, to take ownership of everything. That way I find solutions. If I see myself as a victim, I'm just giving up. But if I see myself as the cause, then I can find solutions. That's personal philosophy. I'm not saying everyone should do that. It's just how I like to frame things. So first of all, I take ownership of, if this keeps coming back in my life, what in me has been appealing to that, or what is this a response to? Maybe something in me is wounded or scared legitimately, or maybe something I'm not really kind of upset at, and I need to figure out what this is. Then I can act upon it. And then I can go into the specific beliefs that the person is trying to impose based on my potential vulnerability. And that will make the whole thing much easier to get into concrete examples than trying to learn theoretically, this is the intention pattern, that people would just give up with that.
If I could summarize what I think I heard, is that if you want to learn how neurolinguistic programming is used, you could start by looking at tweets that particularly upset you, and then
very good, yeah.
and then try to analyze why those particular words, because if you think about it, it's pixels on a screen. It's alphanumeric characters that somebody has typed into their device, and it's come out of your device, and it's raised your blood pressure and made you angry, right?
Yeah.
What is it about the arrangements of those letters on that screen that is making you so angry? And then if you can start to break down what the words are, how they're put together, what the cause effects are, what the complex equivalencies are, what the presuppositions are. Presuppositions is a big one, where people assume that somebody else means or says something else. These are all things that, if I can understand, if I'm understanding you correctly, take that bad feeling that you have about that thing that you're reading, and try to come to terms not with the projection of the person that you have that you imagine is sitting there typing, but what is it about those words that are impacting you in the way that they are impacting? And then at that point, once you learn how to recognize it, this is I'm calling the episode active listening, but this is like active reading, right? Like if you're looking
comprehension.
At
Comprehension. So in the end, it can be reading or it can be listening. Many things I want to add up to that to make it more clear, because it's very interesting. So indeed, whatever is getting you upset, two things about this. The first one is specifically, what do we mean by getting upset? We mean the images that pop up in your brain. If you're getting upset, you have made an image of something. Maybe an image of the person typing, indeed, that can be one example. Maybe an image of a souvenir or memory you had. Maybe somebody said something and it triggered a memory, negative memory, and you're reacting not to what they said, to the pixels on the screen, but you're reacting to the memory in your mind. And that is the big correlation with what you described as the thought-terminating cliche, where your brain froze. Because when you are getting frozen or getting owned, which is the more savage way of explaining that, whenever you're getting in that frozen state in a conversation, it is specifically because the person unveiled a spot in your mind you're not used to get in touch with, not used to go there. It's not good or bad, it's just you're not used to it, that's all. It doesn't have to be negatively judged, it's just not used to it, not a habit. That's why interrogating yourself first is of massive value, because when you have digged into yourself enough, nobody can shut you down. Nobody can really say the one thing that will make you go, because you have already went there before. You already know how to answer because you have already went there, and you already have prepared because you have touched the vulnerable feelings or the hidden spots, and you know all of them, all the hidden spots in your mind about this topic at least. So then anyone who tries to make a mean comment or anything, you will have an answer because you have already investigated. That's why I advise this to investigate yourself, figure out what got you upset, and eventually applying all this reframing first on your own language. You write down the thoughts. Okay, I got upset, or I got annoyed, or I got uncomfortable because. Anything that goes after the because is the belief. So, like you know. So you write down, I got upset, or I don't like this comment because. Because what? What am I projecting? Or maybe something they really mean, but in that case, what is it that they meant that I disagree with or get upset about? Once you have the belief, then the best way is to apply all those sleight of mouth techniques or whatever on the thing you wrote down yourself. How do I know they meant that? How do I know they really wanted me to stay poor, for one example among many? How do I know they meant that? And you dig into yourself to figure that out. When you do that a few times per week, then nobody can ever freeze your brain ever again, because you have already went into all the spots they could be trying to hit to freeze you. So that's my whole point, and that's uncomfortable because when people are not used to unveil their vulnerable spots. But if you do that on your own and nobody has to know about what you felt, that's really personal. If you do that a few times per week, you will become a much better conversationalist because of that exercise.
Right. So you're talking about logos again. You're talking about using words as a utility to journal the things that are upsetting you, and then to use more words, to process those things that you have documented. And by virtue of the fact that you're using words to do that, you will be reprogramming yourself. And I mean, and at the end of the day, these tools, you talked about when I first spoke to you about reprogramming, about self-help, about reprogramming yourself. You can use these tools on yourself. You can reprogram yourself. Which leads me to one other question. I don't know how much domain experience you have on this, but I think that I read once, and I'm desperately trying for my own book. I'm looking for the citation, but I think that I read once that neurolinguistic programming. It's funny, if you look up neurolinguistic programming on Wikipedia, it says that it's a pseudoscience. It's it's very kind of dismissive, I would say, a dismissive definition of it as a discipline. However, as I understand it, John Grinder came out of the United States Army Special Forces, which make Defense Intelligence Agency, which makes me think that it was always a government program.
No,
No,
not that I know of, but
well, a covert. Let's just call it a covert.
okay.
My tinfoil hat analysis.
Okay. I see.
Okay, would be if a guy comes out of the Defense Intelligence Agency and then
Okay, yeah.
and then his first contract is with the United States Army Sniper School, where he takes his assistant Tony Robbins with him to increase the efficiency of the United States Army Sniper School. I'm looking. I'm looking at all the evidence on the
I
table.
see.
You used to be Special Forces psychiatrist or psychologist. You were in the Defense Intelligence Agency. You left the Army. You hooked up with this guy, Richard Bandler. You put together this thing called Neurolinguistic and Robert Dilts. And
Later, yeah.
okay, and maybe you were working with Gregory Bateson, who was OSS. And then you come up with this way of quickly training people in how to use language effectively in their operational skills. And then your first contract is with the United States Army Sniper School. I'm thinking, this sounds like a military program to me.
Okay.
So I don't remember where I read that Tony Robbins and John Grinder went and worked on the U.S. Army Sniper School, and I was wondering if you in your
Yeah.
travails.
Yeah. I remember I read about that in the Unlimited Power from Tony Robbins,
Yeah,
where he talked about it.
he touches on it a little bit, but not in such detail. So I know that I tried looking in The Game by Neil Strauss because I thought maybe it was in Neil
No,
Strauss's book.
I don't think it was in this one, but probably ask ChatGPT. It could probably give an answer to this one. Strangely enough, I met an Indian NLP trainer back in Chiang Mai years ago who said it was bullshit that Tony Robbins was never involved in that project. He only looked at it afterward, or was involved on the paper, but not really into it. John Grinder was the one who was involved with the army, because he was already part of the army indeed before the starting of NLP. Then, so is it coming from the government? I don't have any proof of that, but of course I don't know. I wasn't there, so it is possible. I don't have any proof of the contrary either. About your question of the pseudoscience, do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
We could. That's maybe too late, but the funny thing could have been to play the game where you play the devil's advocate, where you try to get me stuck on the pseudoscience thing, and I have to refrain by whatever means I can. We can play that if you want, or I can just end with the answer.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I don't believe it's a pseudoscience, because I believe that if you look at the actual definition of science, it's something that where you have a thesis, and that you have to be able to prove that you can replicate it through experimentation. And I think that that the results speak for themselves at that point. So
my answer, because I have been challenged on this many times, specifically in university, because in university I was attacked on a daily basis by professors who knew everything and who said NLP was just BS. Experts who knew literally everything about the human mind, and they were experts on what NLP was not, and NLP was not science. My answer at the end about this, and it was even very easily shutting down people actually, because I got into the meta frame of, okay, how do you know science is the absolute truth for everything? What's your evidence? Because we have seen the basis of science when I was in college. The basis is Aristotle and René Descartes, the philosopher, the French philosopher. I think, therefore I am.
Oh, yeah, Descartes, yeah. Cartesian, yeah. Well, again,
Sorry.
Descartes and Aristotle, if you start to look at things linguistically, they fall apart.
Exactly. So the word science mostly, not only, but mostly come from their thinking. My point is not that they were wrong or that science didn't provide a lot of positive value. My point is that those were only two human beings. How do we know a human being can't be wrong? A few times at least. Or every human being on Earth never wrong. It's possible to make a mistake. So I'm not saying what they invented was not valuable. I'm saying that just because they said science was the ultimate validity for everything we study in the world doesn't mean it is true either. So yes, NLP might be a pseudoscience. How does that prevent it from being valuable? And when I said this, usually people don't really try to argue anymore because they don't really have an answer to this.
Right. Well, I think it's funny that they're using a cause-effect complex equivalency to establish their expertise. I mean, what is really scientific about Sigmund Freud? What is really scientific about Carl Jung? I mean, they've been, and again, I've done a lot of research on this, and there's going to be chapters about it in my book. But if you look at the history of, and it all started with a guy named Anthony Sutton, who wrote a book on the Skull and Bones Society, and then there's a dozen books that I can quote off the top of my head. But the first degreed program in the United States university system was psychology, and it was based on something that was taught by a guy named Wilhelm Wundt at the University of Berlin. And all of this, and it started out as behavioral science, but then they started to layer Freud and Jung and all of this other stuff on top of their behavioral science. The behavioral science they could prove. Pavlov could make a dog drool, and there's all kinds of other experiments that have been done that are actual science. But then there's a bunch of other stuff that's been laid on top of it. These cause-effect complex equivalencies that call themselves science, that wear a white lab coat, that claim the title of expert and allow people to put letters after their names as an abbreviation of something that indicate that they are smarter or know better or have more knowledge or understanding of something than you do by virtue of the fact that they've got a piece of animal skin with a foil stamp on the wall behind them.
Exactly.
So anyway, so I guess where we can end this is that you can tell me more about, if people want to understand on a higher level than just reacting to why they're getting mad at their tweets, what kind of things you offer at Mind Titans, and how they can get more involved with understanding NLP.
Yeah, the PDF I give for free is a good starting point. By the time at least this is recorded, it is still the only PDF I give on the website, though you can't miss it. It is sleight of mouth, but applied to real situations, because I think people learn better by giving them proper context than trying to explain to them theoretically. Then I published recently a sleight of mouth tutorial. At least on the thumbnail, it is written sleight of mouth tutorial. The title of the video is I mastered the sleight of mouth and you can too. I think that will be a great starting point, because it will clarify all the patterns one by one. For somebody who's just arriving and doesn't really know, I guess this 40-minute video is a very good starting point. Combined with my PDF. Then, as soon as possible, what I encourage is really to link it to one specific situation you want to be able to interact into. You can take a Twitter politics, that's one context. You can need to argue in a negotiation at your job with like certain people with whom you work with, or with your wife or your husband. It has to be linked to at least one context. And into one context, you write down all the phrases you can't answer, or like all the kind of attacks you have trouble figuring out an answer to. And from there, you see how can I apply sleight of mouth to those phrases I can't reply to. The way you do with ChatGPT is a great example. That way you write down the phrase you can't answer to, or you have trouble finding an answer for, and you ask ChatGPT, give me the 14 patterns one by one on this. Then, as soon as possible, I suggest to come up with your own reframes. And that's where the intuition will come more into play, because, again, images, if you can't answer to something, just look up into your mind, make an image of what the person just said. If the person said something and you have trouble replying, okay, I put that up. What is an image, a simple image of what they just said? And then you ask yourself, what is wrong with that image? What's not clicking with that image? There is something missing, something fucked up, something wrong with that image. What is it? And that's your reframe. That may not end the conversation, but that's the direction your mind needs to take, so that you either win the conversation if it is really an argument, or at least you find a resolution somehow.
Which leads me to one more question, and I know I said that was the last question, but I'll let you go after this. I'll let you go after this, which is that one of the things I think that, and maybe I should have asked this at the beginning, but one of the things that's interesting about NLP is that, as I understand it, and you can tell me if I have this correct, is that one of the breakthroughs with NLP is that it takes advantage of Milton Erickson's understanding that people go into a trance state all the time. And that if you can learn how to recognize, first of all, if you can elicit that trance state in them covertly, then it allows you to make suggestions. But talk a little bit about the trance state and how that works in everyday language, as opposed to the picture that people have in their heads of a therapist saying you're getting sleepy, and the watch ticking back and forth.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have been talking about it from the beginning, because whenever we talk about internal processing, whether feelings, images, or sounds in your head, this is what we might refer to as a trance state, if we take Milton Erickson's definition. And this is just another way, compared to sleight of mouth, it is another way of explaining, another model to explain how communication works. They are not contradictory, they are just two different aspects of the same thing. The trance idea is that any words, indeed, in the context, any words can provoke feelings, states, notions, ideas, desires in the head. If the words you said provoke something, then you hypnotize the person. And the word hypnotize here is very neutral. That doesn't do anything by itself. You just appeal something internal about the person you are interacting with. You said something, they got mad, you hypnotize them. You said something, they got happy, or they got motivated, you hypnotize them. That is the simplest definition. In that sense, indeed, we all hypnotize each other every day without knowing it. The purpose is to be more intentional about it, to become able to figure out how what I said triggered this. When you provided the sleight of mouth examples and the guy overreacted to one of your examples, okay, what was my intention that eventually triggered that response? Because I like to take ownership. Doesn't mean you are wrong or anything, but I like to take ownership. So what was my intention that made me potentially trigger that response, and how can I change my intention so that I trigger another response? If I didn't want him to react like this, and if I wanted him to, on the opposite, see what I meant about it's just manipulation, guy, wake the fuck up and notice that. Which other ways could I have had to say what I had to say so that he understands it that way, in the way I wanted him to understand? That's just another way of seeing communication. So anything we say is producing feelings, ideas, thoughts, images in their head, and we can adapt, learn to adapt. Okay, if I said this and they got mad, how can I say it next time so that they see my point instead of getting mad? Or if I got mad, we go back to what we said earlier, I got mad, which means I put myself in a trance state of negativity, of anger, or whatever. Sure, that's nothing bad in itself. How did I get myself there? Because indeed it was just pixels on the screen or somebody saying a few words. The words by themselves don't mean anything, but they meant something to me if I got mad. What was the process? How did I condition myself unconsciously to get mad because of those words? And how can I attribute another meaning to those words so that I get into a positive trance instead, one conducive to resolving conflicts, conducive to creating partnerships, or conducive to getting aware of that person if that is really a manipulator and I just need to cut the roots with that person once and for all. Different directions possible.
Well, that's a terrific way to end the show, and I was going to cut this out and put it at the beginning, but I think that you tied up so many other things that it's going to be worth people watching this video all the way to the end to get to that point. Besides Mind Titans, do you do other work? Do you do private consulting? Do you do what other ways can people interact with Matteo Morelli?
I got way too many private demands. I had to stop getting them because I have a few clients already, like who paid like long ago, but paid a lot, and so I'm giving them proper guidance over time to keep the work with them. With those plus the YouTube and the book, I have too much stuff on hand right now, so I don't do anything besides. Maybe later, possible. By the time people watch this, maybe there will be something else out there. But so if people want to catch anything that I do, just go to YouTube, Mind Titans, or write an email to contact@mindtitans.com. I'm checking them like every week, so
no, I will probably see it. Otherwise, just YouTube, comment on a video on YouTube anyway, and I will see it too. I think that is the best way if anyone has questions or they want to some guidance or anything or some recommendation of a book, or I think that is the best way to contact me.
Okay, well, terrific. Thank you so much for this this interview today. I know that I got a lot out of it, and I'm hoping that the people who watch are getting something out of it also.